The morning of June 19th, 1944, was unnaturally still. The sky over southern France hung heavy with grey clouds, and the air smelled of rain and smoke, the kind that clings to a battlefield long after the fighting ends. At dawn, 300 men from the 141st Infantry Regiment took position along a rocky ridge outside a small town called Verrières. Their orders were simple and impossible. They were to hold the ridge, no matter the cost. Unbeknownst to them, 10,000 enemy soldiers were moving toward them, an entire division, veterans hardened by years of combat, advancing with tanks, artillery, and overwhelming firepower. What happened over the next 20 hours would become one of the most defiant and heroic last stands in modern military history. Eyewitnesses described that morning as eerily calm. One soldier would later say, "It was like the earth was holding its breath." Captain Daniel Rains, only 26 years old, walked the line, checking rifles, adjusting helmets, speaking to his men. His face was calm, but his eyes told the truth. He knew what was coming. Behind him lay the Allied supply route, the lifeline of the northern advance. If that road fell, thousands of lives would be trapped behind enemy lines. He had no choice but to fight. Before the first shot was fired, he gathered his men and said just one sentence: "Hold this ridge. No matter what happens, we hold." At 9 o'clock, the silence broke. Artillery shells screamed through the air, exploding across the hillside. The ground convulsed as dirt and metal rained down. Men ducked into trenches as shrapnel tore through the air. The bombardment lasted nearly 30 minutes, an unending roar that shook the earth itself. Then, through the smoke, they came. A grey tide of soldiers appeared across the valley, hundreds at first, then thousands. Their helmets glinted in the dull light. Tanks rolled behind them, engines growling. Captain Rains raised his binoculars, took a deep breath, and gave the order, "Hold your fire. Wait for my signal." The men froze, gripping their rifles, hearts pounding. When the front line of the enemy was less than 200 yards away, Rains shouted, "Fire!" The ridge exploded to life. Machine guns rattled, mortars whistled down from the slopes, and rifles cracked like thunder. The first wave of the enemy was shredded in seconds. Smoke and dirt filled the air, turning day into dusk. For a moment, it seemed as if 300 men had stopped an army, but then came the second wave. The enemy surged forward again, firing as they advanced. Bullets tore through the trenches, men screamed, and the air thickened with gunpowder. The defenders fought with every ounce of strength they had, reloading, shouting, firing into the smoke. Private Lewis, the youngest among them, barely 19, later said, "The air was so thick with dust and blood, I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. I just kept firing." By noon, the battle had raged for over 3 hours. The ridge shook under the weight of explosions. The enemy had suffered terrible losses, hundreds dead, but they kept coming. By mid-afternoon, the defenders began to run out of ammunition. Machine gun barrels glowed red, rifles jammed from overuse. The men scavenged what they could from fallen comrades. Lieutenant Harper crawled to Rains through the mud, shouting above the roar, "Sir, we're nearly out. If they come again—" Before he could finish, a shell exploded nearby, throwing them both into the dirt. Rains coughed through the smoke and said simply, "Then we make it count." The sixth assault began at 4:30. It was the largest yet. The enemy advanced under a curtain of artillery fire, their numbers filling the horizon. The defenders had little left. Rains stood in the trench, looked at his men, and gave his final command, "Fix bayonets." The metallic click of steel echoed down the line. Exhausted, battered, bleeding, they climbed out of the trench and met the enemy head-on. What followed was chaos beyond description. Men fought hand to hand in the mud, smoke, and fire. The ridge became a furnace of screams, gunfire, and explosions. A few defenders used their rifles as clubs when bullets ran dry. Others threw grenades at point-blank range. The noise was unbearable. The smell of cordite, mud, and blood hung over everything. By sunset, the ridge was a wasteland. Flames flickered through the shattered trees. Of the 300 who began that morning, fewer than 100 could still fight. The rest were dead or wounded. As darkness fell, the enemy withdrew briefly to regroup. For the first time in hours, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of fire and the groans of the dying. Captain Rains walked what was left of the trench line. He found Private Lewis sitting against a sandbag wall, his hands shaking uncontrollably. "Sir," Lewis whispered, "there's too many of them." Rains looked at him, tired but unbroken. "Then we make them pay for every inch." In the valley below, through the haze of smoke, Rains could see new movement, another wave preparing to attack. The captain tightened his grip on his rifle. He knew this would be the end. The final assault began just after midnight. Flare guns lit up the night sky with eerie green light. The air filled again with the sound of gunfire, shouts, and explosions. Tracers streaked through the darkness like comets. The defenders, now reduced to only a few dozen, fired until they had nothing left. Some used pistols, some used knives, some fought with bare hands. Captain Rains fought alongside them, blood running down his face, refusing to retreat. He was last seen firing from the front line, surrounded by smoke and fire. By dawn, the ridge had gone quiet. The battle was over. When Allied reinforcements finally broke through from the rear, they expected to find the position lost. Instead, they found the ridge still held at an unspeakable cost. Smoke drifted across the field, the air thick with the smell of burning metal and earth. Captain Rains was found sitting against a rock, his uniform torn and face blackened. His rifle rested across his knees. When a medic reached him, Rains opened his eyes weakly and whispered, "We held." Behind him lay a battlefield of ruined, cratered earth, shattered tanks, and hundreds of enemy bodies. 300 men had stopped an army of 10,000, but almost none of them had survived to see it. When reports reached Allied command, few believed it. 300 against 10,000, impossible. But the photographs, casualty lists, and eyewitness accounts proved otherwise. The ridge had held for nearly 20 hours. The enemy advance had been delayed long enough for reinforcements to regroup. The supply line and the entire offensive had been saved. Historians would later call it a miracle of courage. Others called it madness. But for those who lived through it, it was neither. It was duty. It was brotherhood. Weeks later, survivors were interviewed in field hospitals. Private Lewis, his arm in a sling, said quietly, "We didn't hold because we thought we could win. We held because we couldn't let each other down." Captain Daniel Rains would not recover from his wounds. He was posthumously awarded the Silver Star for valor. Of the 300 men who went up that ridge, fewer than 50 came back. But their stand changed the course of the campaign and perhaps the war itself. Today, the ridge outside Verrières is quiet. Wild grass covers the trenches. Rusted helmets and twisted shrapnel lie buried beneath the soil. If you stand there at dawn, when the wind moves through the grass, it's said you can still hear it, the distant echoes of gunfire, the shouts, and the unyielding courage of the 300 who refused to fall. They were not fighting for glory or medals or even victory. They fought for each other, and in doing so they became legends. 300 men, 10,000 enemies, one impossible stand, and a story that the wind still carries across the silent hills of southern France.